Thursday, so we're going to have the review session Wednesday night and the final exam on Thursday instead of Friday. So we're going to have the final on Thursday, and then that'll give you some time on Friday to be working on the project, the Economic Freedom Project, which you can do with the sidewalk chalk is the one that I'm recommending. So that is the new plan. So any questions on that? All right, so I've got a couple videos we're going to start off with, and pull out a piece of paper for points today. So from the video, what is economic freedom? So I want you to be able to kind of take some notes on getting around being able to really have a good understanding of economic freedom. And then you can start thinking about what are some subtopics that I think you'll see. So what are some subtopics of economic freedom?
I just got a question. For the
Hold on. Okay, any questions?
For the word count, does it include the short summary of economic freedom and the subtopic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the total paper. Okay, so so you kind of got the idea. The economic freedom is kind of the overarching thing that's being measured, and then as you're going to see from these videos, there's more to it on what we get out of it in a sense. So the first video has Jim Courtney in it, who just passed away in January, so it's an older video, but it also has some of his co-authors. And so also remember that you're going to want to use the Fraser Institute Economic Freedom number. So the Fraser Institute is the one that you'll see is kind of highlighted in here. So here we go.
I'm Johan Norberg, and I've been studying economic freedom for decades. What is it? And what impact does it have on people's lives? I'm here in Montreal, Canada, outside the offices of the Fraser Institute, whose work on economic freedom.
Let me start that up.
I'm Johan Norberg, and I've been studying economic freedom for decades. What is it? And what impact does it have on people's lives? I'm here in Montreal, Canada, outside the offices of the Fraser Institute, whose work on economic freedom has become the gold standard, used by economists, researchers, and policymakers around the world. The Institute has developed an objective way of measuring the economic freedom of a country, and they've created a report that I've often used myself in my writings and lectures. But the Economic Freedom of the World report is not just about numbers and charts and graphs. No, it's really about the people. People who want the opportunity to work hard, to become self-sufficient and independent, and to improve their quality of life. I'm here today to meet with the authors of the Economic Freedom of the World report and to find out about their process of measuring countries.
Great to see you. Great to see you. Thank you for being here. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. What is this report and how does it work?
Well, it's really an effort to view the world through the lens of opportunity and control over one's life. Essentially, institutions and policies influence the opportunities that individuals have in terms of choosing their own occupations, choosing entrepreneurial activities, engaging in trade with people, and perhaps most importantly, the opportunity to keep what they earn. And we thought it would be interesting to see how those changes affect the economic freedom of people.
So the idea was to try to quantify this. So we had to collect data on a lot of countries, data from the World Bank, the IMF, other reputable sources, and then we put it all into the computer. We worked on it for many, many years. Jim had some health problems and lost his eyesight, so that set us back a little bit, but we persevered, and after almost 7 or 8 years, we finally came out with a good report.
So you're basically looking at the kind of things that would give people power over their incomes, their wealth, their jobs, the freedom to start a business, to trade.
Precisely.
That's right. We take the data that is encapsulated fascinated with this idea of economic freedom, and we rank 144 countries around the world on a 0 to 10 scale, with 10 being the most economically free.
Why 144 countries? Why not every single country on the world?
Well, we're a data-driven exercise, and for some countries, there's not data available, either because it's too small or it's an autocratic regime. Cuba, for example, the data we have either doesn't exist or can't really be trusted. And so, 144 countries are the ones we think we can rank very well, and it covers about 97% of the world's population.
So the index has been put to use in many, many, many different ways. Certainly people look at income and growth, but very importantly is people looking at human rights violations, incidents of civil war and violence. Really interesting to see the number of ways the index was used.
So guys, you've been using this report to rank countries for the past 17 years. What have you learned from the analysis of the data?
There's been a lot of work done on economic freedom and unemployment. And countries that are less free have higher rates of unemployment. In terms of starting out in your life, the ability to go out and be able to build up skills in the workplace is very personally liberating. And it must be very difficult to be in a country, let's say like Spain, where you have youth unemployment of over 50%. That's going to be, it makes my outlook for the future very, very bleak.
One of the most important things we've learned is that countries that are economically more free grow more rapidly and achieve higher income levels. And in fact, not just a little bit higher income levels, but a lot higher income levels. For example, the per person income of the highest quartile, the highest 1/4 of economically free countries, is 7 times what the figure is for the lowest group. So that's a huge difference.
But it's not just about rising incomes overall, it's also about the poorest of the poor. If we look at that bottom quartile, the poorest 10% of those societies have average incomes of about $1,200 per capita. If we look at the upper quartile, the most free quartile, they have average incomes of over $11,000. Now, that's not a lot to live on, but it's a whole lot more than $1,200.
So as people work their way out of poverty, that's a substantial improvement in their quality of life.
It's not just about the quality of life, it's about the quantity of life. If we look at the most free countries and compare them to the least free countries, the most free countries have substantially higher life expectancies, 18 years.
A lot of that relationship is probably driven by the fact that more free countries have higher incomes, better sanitation, nutrition, things like that. If you live to be 80 versus 60, that's the difference between getting to know your grandkids, see your grandkids grow up, see your great-grandchildren. Economic freedom is sure, it's about income, it's about growth, but it's also about quality of life and knowing your grandkids or not. And if you have more economic freedom, you have a better chance of knowing your grandkids. And that's more important, or as important, as how many cars are in the driveway and things like that.
For over 30 years, the United States was around 3rd place. But in this latest report, the US is at 19. Why? What happened?
Well, the freest economies in the world are Hong Kong and Singapore, and they have been the freest for more than 3 decades now. Other countries that rank relatively high are Switzerland, New Zealand, Canada, Australia. I think actually that's the 6 highest countries. The United States was, for an extended period of time, all during the 1980s and 1990s, was ranked 3rd behind only Hong Kong and Singapore, but the United States has actually dropped down in recent years, since 2000. So the U.S. is not as free as what it was a few years ago.
Well, generally, the Economic Freedom Index is showing a rise of economic freedom around the world, but only a handful of countries are decreasing.
The biggest single factor contributing to the U.S. decline is the decline in the legal structure area and protection of property rights. From the wars on drugs and terror to the more widespread use of eminent domain to take property from one party and transfer it to another, to the auto bailout, which tended to undermine the property rights of bondholders.
Some people object to economic freedom because they think it's just freedom for the well-off, for the big businesses, and for those who already have power. What's your take on that?
I think if you look at the U.S. In response to kind of the financial crisis, what did we get? We got greater concentration in the banking industry. It's harder to be a local bank, local savings and loan. The banking interests and banking lobbyists used the opportunity with the financial crisis to solidify their position in the marketplace. That's not economic freedom, right? That's antithetical to economic freedom.
All those lobbyists that those corporations hire and they send to the national capital, they're not arguing for more economic freedom, they're arguing for less, they're arguing for special privileges.
The political process favors well-organized interest groups, and typically that's going to be the well-off among the business groups as well as well-organized labor groups.
Whereas there's really no interest groups for those who aren't there in the market yet, for the future stores and businesses, things like that.
Future entrepreneur, the taxpayer, and the consumer are not well-organized, and therefore the political process seldom represents them.
Too often politicians are only offering short-term fixes. They promise instant gratification. And the problem is that at the end, it comes at the expense of economic freedom and competition in the marketplace.
Oppression of economic freedom gets kind of subtle, and it goes under the radar, and fewer people notice it. And that's what makes it very difficult to defend.
That's the people claim about this Economic Freedom of the World report. It makes these trends visible. It tells us where to look. It gets us talking about it. And that's why we do this.
That's why you do this. That's why I write about it. That's why we talk about it. Guys, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your work on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So that was Jim. He was the older blind guy, if you didn't figure that out.
Joe quite gives us subtopics. We're supposed to
Can't go? Yes.
So,
be like,
what did you guys come up with for economic freedom? Yeah.
Is it like, people being able to choose what kind of stuff they want to get?
Okay, yeah, I think having more choice at the individual level of doing what you kind of want to do, right, is what Seth was saying. What else can you add onto that for economic freedom? What about it as a measure? Like, what are some ways it's measured? Because that's part of the definition. Let me go, Valentine.
How easy is it to like start a business?
Yeah, how easy it is to start a business. So our entrepreneur is pretty free to get involved with something. Tim, did you want to add anything onto that? You were thinking that too? So the ability of individuals to kind of be free to do what they want to do. The measurements came from those 5 things we did yesterday. So the 5 elements with size of government, which was the amount of government spending in taxes. So the idea is if the government takes more of your money in the form of taxes, that's less empowerment for you to decide what you want to do with your money, right? And so by keeping taxes and spending lower as a fraction of the overall economy, which would be measured with GDP, then they're doing that. And having sound money, so inflation being kept low. Those are ways we're measuring that. Countries that have crazy inflation rates like Venezuela and Zimbabwe lead to less freedoms. I got some other videos to kind of go through that as well. All right, what did you guys have for the subtopics? What were some subtopics that you just kind of saw as they were talking? Tim?
Freedom of jobs and keeping their own.
Okay, yeah, I started off with the unemployment rate, right? So some of the outcomes with more economic freedom, then people tend to be more employed, right? More employment or less unemployment. Okay, what else did you have for some subtopics?
What is it like? People living longer?
Yeah, living longer is an outcome of the index. What else? There's quite a few of them listed in the video. I just want to get you guys thinking about what a subtopic is versus kind of what the overall topic is. Income, yeah, income is part of it. So income is not used to measure economic freedom. The amount of income per person is an outcome of economic freedom, and therefore it's a subtopic related to it. Okay? So kind of keep those juices flowing. I got another short video, and I want you to add on from this next video. Let's continue to sharpen what your definition is of what is economic freedom and what are some of these subtopics. So I got another short video we'll do. Let's see, where's this one? Right here.
Building your online business?
Macroeconomics.com and set up your...
Economic freedom is about, yes, the freedom to buy and sell stuff, but it's also about the freedom to interact with people, to converse with people, to travel where we want, to say the things we want to say. These things that involve interaction with others are truly at the core of economic freedom. There's a tremendous body of evidence that suggests that economic freedom is associated with many of the things we think of when we think of a healthy society. We can look at the Economic Freedom of North America Index. States with more economic freedom have higher growth rates of the economy, they have lower unemployment rates, they have less debt per GDP than states that are less free. All of these things we associate with economic health are also associated with economic freedom. But we see the same phenomenon when we compare countries of the world. The most economically free countries have GDPs per capita that are about 10 times the size of less economically free countries. One might argue that what we're seeing is the big country effect. That is, big countries will tend to be economically free, and they'll also tend to have high GDP per capita. But if we restrict our vision to just the poorest 20% of countries, the poor countries that have the most economic freedom have GDP per capitas that are 50% greater than the poor countries that have less economic freedom. One counter-argument is that GDP per capita only measures average income. It's possible that you could have a country with a small number of elite, rich people and a large number of destitute people. But if we examine inequality measures, what we find is that the countries that are more economically free also have more equitable income distributions. That is, economic freedom is not only associated with higher income levels on average, but it's also associated with a more equitable income distribution. Skeptics might argue that economic freedom achieves greater income because of exploitation of people and exploitation of the environment. Let's look at the data and see if this is the case. On average, women in economically free countries have more gender equality than women in economically less free countries. Also, child labor rates tend to be lower in economically free countries and higher in economically unfree countries. One might argue that child labor rates are lower in economically free countries because economically free countries are richer and therefore can import products from poor countries that do not have child labor laws. In effect, the rich countries encourage the poor countries to exploit their children, so the rich countries don't have to exploit theirs. But if we look at the poorest countries, we see the same phenomenon. Even amongst the poorest countries, those with more economic freedom have lower child labor rates than those with less economic freedom. Economic freedom also accompanies reduced exploitation of the environment. For example, deforestation is worst amongst the least economically free countries. Meanwhile, the most economically free countries actually experience reforestation. Their forests are growing. Economic freedom is about the freedom to act. The more freedom we have to act, the more able we are to do the things we want to do, to create wealth, to protect the environment, to help people be equal across genders, to help children no longer have to work in factories. It's about being free to make your own choices and to live with the consequences of those choices, provided that you do not violate anyone else's freedom. The more economic freedom we have, the more able we are to make the world a better place.
All right. So, what other subtopics did you pull out of that one? Let's go, Arthur.
You said that everything is think about when we think about a healthy society is what we find in like freedom.
Okay. Yeah, and what were some of those things, I guess, to kind of expand on that?
Less debt.
Yeah, sorry, I did point ahead. Go ahead.
Less debt.
Less debt. Okay, Arthur, what did you want to add back?
Just interacting with people, traveling.
Okay.
Free speech.
Yeah, yeah. Jesse?
Environmentalism.
Environmentalism, yeah. So kind of a little bit counterintuitive. Sometimes you might have the perception that more freedom means that people are going to exploit resources and wreck the environment. Turns out that's not true. By the way, there's trade-offs there, right? So places that are more developed also have kind of more developed governance too with that. And so countries that are probably in those middle levels, like India and China, kind of in that second and third quartile, there's a lot more exploitation going on because of the lack of development of kind of good government and finding that balance. So again, economic freedom is kind of complex, and that's what this study really highlights, is that you're going to have things growing in maybe different ways or different outcomes than you expect. So the environment was one. Valentine?
Child labor.
Child labor was a big one that they focused on. So yeah, this trying to pop some holes in these different things of what kind of outcomes might be there. So anybody else last subtopics? I think I tried to give you a good smattering of them there.
Bigger GDP per capita.
Yeah.
Bigger, like equitable income.
Yeah, yes, income inequality was one that was different than what we had saw before. Justin?
Also going to higher growth rates.
Higher growth rates, yeah, the growth of the economy, which is kind of where I'm gonna start in on here in a little bit. Okay, yeah, Valentine?
The gender inequality.
And gender inequality, yes. So all of those are kind of interesting subtopics. And so how this would work for your paper is you can, again, look back to the syllabus, spend some time on explaining what economic freedom is in general, and then, one of those outcomes, you can pick a couple of them if you want, but at least one subtopic, and then spend a little time on that topic. You might show whatever your country is, where its ranking is, and so if the country you picked is in maybe you picked Indonesia or something, and it's in the third quartile, you could still say my country's in the third quartile. Countries in the third quartile have worse outcomes for child labor rates than countries in the first quartile, right? So you can kind of make the subtopic have a connection to your country, but then also explain, what the overall results were with that subtopic. Does that make sense? Any other questions or comments there to shape up that? Okay, so let's do a little bit of board work now.
Do you want to come to our
We can just leave them for now, that's fine. You guys hang on to those, we're gonna have another video coming up. All right, so, let me get rid of this. Okay. So I'm going to pick up on a topic, it's the first part of this chapter on economic growth. So, what is economic growth? So I think Seth, you maybe brought that up, or maybe it was Justin, one of you guys. That's a little bit different. So it's the level we looked at, like GDP per person. Growth is the idea of that changing over time. So economic growth, first of all, let's not forget it's one of our biggies, increasing real GDP, right? Having more stuff. Well, what we did in the early chapters with the international and some other things is if we, look at beer and pizza. The production possibilities frontier shows the maximum combination of two goods an economy can produce given its available resources and technology. So this was the PPF, the production possibilities frontier. Again, this is review from stuff we did in the first week of class. And what we get out of this is where economic growth really comes from. So the key point here is economic growth comes from an increase in resources or an increase in technological advance. So we could hold the actual physical quantity of resources constant, but come up with a new technology that allows us to use them better, faster, quicker, like using AI. And so the cool thing that comes out of this is if we come up with a new beer invention, a new machine, so example, a new beer machine maker, so whatever that thing is, we get more pizza. A new beer machine maker makes more pizza too. That's the counterintuitive thing about economic growth. How do we make more pizza? Well, if we threw all of the resources in society at pizza production, including the new beer making machine, we couldn't have any more pizza. But if we threw all the resources at beer making, of course, including the new beer making machine, we could have more beer. And so we can also be anywhere in between. And so what happens when there's a change in technology or resources is that the production possibilities frontier shifts outward. That is economic growth. And so that allows us to move from point A, where we were in 2000, let's call this the PPF for 2020, let's just call it 2020. And this is the PPF with the new beer machine in 2021. Well, the production possibilities frontier shows all of the possible combinations the economy can be at. We can be anywhere along here. And so if we wanted to, we could just increase our beer consumption and keep pizza consumption where we were. We had 100 pizzas and we had 75 beers. Well, now we could have 110 beers. That's one possibility, is that we just wanted to get drunk. And we'd have the freedom to do that. Maybe. As long as we didn't kill anybody drunk driving. So, we got little stories we can tell. But we could also choose, so this could be, let's call it B1. But we could also choose to be at B2, where we didn't want to get any more drunk than we already were, so we stayed at 75, but that allowed us to get 120 pizzas. We could be there. We could be at B3. B3, we have a little bit of pizza and a little bit of beer. We could be anywhere along there. And so this is really exciting for economic freedom. If we push down to the lower levels where the entrepreneurs are and the creativity of people trying to live their lives and solve their own problems, and they come up with a whiz-bang idea on beer making, they didn't intend to increase pizza production for the society, correct? That wasn't what they wanted to do. They're a beer maker. They just wanted to do what's best for themselves, for their lives, for their families, and those people close to them. And so they came up with this new beer invention. They didn't necessarily care about anybody else, or that the results of their actions would lead to more pizza, but it did, right? So we get this unintended consequence of pushing things down through economic freedom out